Thank you for listening to this episode.
And follow the podcast on social media by finding at prestigiouspod. And if you'd like to be coached on how to live a more prestigious life, you can reach out to me, Chris Bean, at Chris Bean Official, or by emailing the podcast directly at prestigiousinitiative@gmail.com.
Lastly, sign up for our newsletter either through social media or on our website.
This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Bean. Today's guest is Albert Bramante, Ph.D., a certified psychology professor, talent agent, certified hypnotist, NLP practitioner, and author of Rise Above the Script. With 20 years at the crossroads of entertainment and psychology, he's also an AI educator teaching ChatGPT, Claude, and Canva tools. Today, we're going to be diving into mindset, performance blocks, and imposter syndrome. Albert, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
So, Albert, why would somebody want to listen to our conversation here today?
Well, I think one of the issues that comes up with everybody that we're all facing is imposter syndrome, fear of success, and sometimes even self-doubt, which affects all types of business people, entrepreneurs. So I really think it's important to listen and kind of get some strategies here.
Okay. Now, with fear, one of the things you said there was fear of success. What is that? What an interesting thing, right? Fear of success, because everybody wants to be successful. I want this, I want that, I want to be successful. But there's a sort of, let's say, pressure that goes with that. There's a sort of stepping outside of the comfort zone if you want to achieve that success. So can you talk about why people might be afraid to reach success and what some things they could do to overcome that?
Well, the main reason why they make fear of success is a change
Hmm.
that's associated with that. The responsibilities that may come up, the circumstances may come up, but ultimately it's a fear of change, the fear of disruption in a sense. Because no matter, like, let's say you land a major success, which is great, and obviously we all want to achieve that, but that could also mean that your life is going to change on a monumental level.
And then trying to
And that
overlay that new success on the way the life changes with what they have now, there's a disconnect because they're in a kind of a homeostasis now, and they have to move to that new unknown. They have to venture into the unknown. They have to take the hero's journey in order to make it there, and that
right.
is the scary part.
It really is, and it's like it's really about being comfortable with becoming uncomfortable because
Hmm.
one of the things we crave and you know I think you made a good metaphor with homeostasis is the comfort level, that we like to be comfortable, we like our routine, we don't really like those disruptions, as human beings we crave comfort, we're addicted to comfort, and change, well, success is going to equal a total disruption in that. A lot of times is we have to adjust to new things and new responsibilities, new pressures. Relationships may change, depending on each person. So things are going to change when you're successful, and a lot of times it is for the better, but still change is scary.
And I can imagine that okay, so let's say we move from the beginning of the story, we take on the challenge, we travel through unto the unknown, we become the hero in the story, we face face the challenges that are in front of us, we become successful. Yes, there's going to be change. Yes, there's going to be uncertainty. Yes, there's going to be let's say out of balance for a little bit. However, once we get there, that's where that's where the imposter syndrome comes in a little bit. But on top of that, there's got to be another homeostasis that we can reach once we make it to that new level. But I think part of that is being able to make it there. And then the other part is understanding ourself in that new form of success and not feeling like a imposter once we reach it there.
Yeah, exactly. And I one thing I really want to address is with, even though we talk about imposter syndrome and as something that is scary, but it's something that we all face. on some levels, especially as identities are changing and new responsibilities are happening. We start to doubt ourselves, like, am I really qualified for doing this? Should I be doing this? And you just start to question yourself. Now, we can also use that as a way to really become knowledgeable in our field. So sometimes it's not so much overcoming imposter syndrome, but working with it so it doesn't affect us or catch up on us.
And
So,
well, I was to say, how,
it's
how
a
how can we do that? How do we use that to uh, not catch up with us? How do we use that to inform those questions to become something that we're not questioning how we go through our day every day?
well, the important thing is, especially if it's due to a change or due to new more responsibilities, well, then the one thing is like, what can you do to learn from this? What systems can you implement so that you can learn these new skills or this newfound responsibility? So if it's about a skill question, well, then maybe are there some classes or courses you can take even online? I mean, there's so much available to us now at our fingertips.
Hmm.
So what can you learn? Is there something that you need to learn? And so, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think it's very important for all of us to adopt the mindset or habit of always learning new things every day, trying out new things, learning new things, implementing new things. And so again, if there's something that's really starting to circle, like, are you were qualified to do this? Well, then if you have a lot of training, then yes, you are. The short answer is yes. And if you need more training, that could be your chance to get it. So, in a sense, you're using that to help you.
And really, from my experience, anyways, I found that kind of the difference between successful people and people that are just on the cusp of being successful is the confidence. And I think oftentimes the people who are just on the cusp of being successful, they're there, they're doing all the right things, but they don't feel it. They're living in
Hmm.
that imposter syndrome and they're not allowing the confidence to take over. And sometimes the people who are confident and successful and doing really well are not as competent as the people who are just on the cusp of doing it, but they have that confidence that the other group is missing, and that confidence really plays such a big role on this.
Hmm. Absolutely, it's the confidence is so important, and that's also competence, and it's just about learning new systems and new techniques in which we can do every day. Again, everything's at our fingertips these days. So, whatever you feel you're lacking in, I work towards that in a sense rather than letting it affect you and saying, or beating yourself up or second guessing yourself.
Okay, now Albert, I want to get a little bit into your background here. You got an interesting background. You brought together psychology, hypnotist or hypnosis. You have talent representation. You have AI. How does all that kind of form together into what you do?
Well, fundamentally, in talent representation, which is what I've been doing for the past 21 years, and you know, which is really about supporting artists in a way and helping them find work and helping mold their and change their careers. So that ultimately is what I do. Now, I also have a background in psychology, I have a PhD, and for my dissertation, which is a monumental thesis for doctoral students, I did my dissertation on self-defeating behavior in performing artists. Because one of the problems that I kept running up against when I was first starting in the talent representation space was a lot of actors who were self-sabotaging, that were being their own worst enemy. And even as a college professor, I noticed this a lot too with students that sometimes were really talented and bright were self-sabotaging and not fully applying themselves. So I think that the important thing with that was to kind of understand it, and then can I help with this? in a sense, or really, really understanding. Like, and that was like my whole thing. I've always been like a scholar. I want to understand things, and this was a complex problem I was doing, and so that's what I did for my doctoral research. Now, the hypnosis and NLP portion came in because I, when I was training to be a clinical psychologist, that was my ultimate goal initially in the beginning. I was going to be a clinical psychologist, and I was going to be a college professor. And towards the end of my clinical studies, there were some things that at the time were not working for me. Number one, the time to do an internship, a practicum, that was just not feasible for me. And the second thing that was I was running up against was there were areas of that field that I started to disagree with that weren't sitting well with me. Number one was labeling people as pathology or symptoms and diagnostic labels. So I really wasn't a big fan of that. And also, it really didn't seem like it was curing anything. It was almost like, yeah, it was managing it, but it was kind of like keeping a person perpetually stuck in the victim or illness, capacity. And with hypnosis and NLP, it uses a lot of principles from psychology and counseling, but it's the change happens in a much more faster or rapid way.
Okay, so I got
So,
a couple different questions there.
mhm.
All right, hypnosis is very very intriguing to me. I've never been hypnotized, but the concept is very interesting because so I understand there's there's the thinking brain, there's a subconscious brain. The subconscious brain is all the things that are essentially the background processings for how we know to be us, right? It's the operating system, in computer technology or computer terminology.
Yeah.
And more often than not, a lot, if not all of those subconscious cues or behaviors or operations stem from childhood. Because anything that we hear between 1 and about 7, we assume is fact. We wear that as a badge of honor or courage or whatever, despite whatever positive or negative thing it may be. And we allow that to interfere, inform us as we grow up. And so all of the things that I am now really can be stemmed from a few probable instances when I was a child. And
Yeah.
I guess my thought process is the hypnosis. What that does is that's a way. So like you could do this as a self person to be able, like
Mhm.
Carl Jung did this. He was able to kind of communicate with the subconscious. But that's really challenging to do, and kind of somehow for some people brings you into a dark road. You have to be able to confront the shadow. Really tough and challenging. But I think the way that I'm kind of internalizing this is with hypnosis. You're sort of being able to interact with that subconscious, but with a guide that's there to help and
Right.
shape and mold that type of interaction between you and the subconscious. Am I hitting the cues there?
Yes. And the hypnotist or the counselor or therapist, whichever you want to call it, is not there to kind of um, be the scripter. It's you're doing the own work. You're on with your subconscious mind. So ultimately, all I am if I'm working with someone is a facilitator. That's all I am. And the person and their subconscious mind is working together. Now, a lot of people find hypnosis to be mysterious, but it's a process that we go through all the time. Every time we watch a movie. Now we sit down and we know the movie is fake, but yet it still evokes emotions in us. Happy, we laugh at a comedy, we get scared during a horror movie, we get emotional during a sad movie. So a lot of times what can happen is, things can add up over time. And even though we know what we're about to see is fake, we sort of have that suspension of disbelief there. And we start to respond, whether by laughing, by crying, or getting scared, even though consciously we know what we're watching is fake and not real. So that's an example of changing, working with how the subconscious works, um, by tricking us in a sense. We also, when we're, especially anybody who's ever driven before, which a lot of that, you ever notice how sometimes you just magically get from route A to route B without even realizing it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we call highway hypnosis in a sense. Your subconscious takes over. Your conscious mind goes, may disappear for a bit, but your subconscious takes over because it's driven that route several hundreds of times already. So it knows it. The same thing goes with the subconscious taking over a behavior, where if it were that easy with the subconscious, if we had access to our subconscious mind, we'd be able to do anything we want to do. But there's stuff that stop us all the time. Otherwise, there would never be procrastination. There would never be um, anything holding us back. We'd be able to do anything we want. But our subconscious mind is the driving force of our psyche, in a sense, a driving force of our behavior. And unless we really work at it, we're not going to realize it. We're just going to keep operating kind of like on automatic pilot.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I've had this kind of concept kind of mulling around in my head for a little while now. And I'm going to share this with you and tell me what you think. Yes, we have the conscious mind, you have the subconscious mind. But okay, so the conscious mind is the brain, that is the mind that is always thinking. It's kind of like that background chatter. It's our internal dialogue. You can't shut it up even if you try, maybe years and years of meditation. Hopefully, eventually, that's the goal. But then you have the subconscious, where the core of our identity essentially is how we know tomorrow to wake up to be us, is that subconscious. But so my concept here is there's another part of this. There's what I refer to as the self mind. So you have the conscious mind, you have the subconscious mind, but kind of in the middle is the self mind, which is who we are.
Mm-hmm.
We hear the conscious. We can choose to tell it to shut up. We can choose to do the things that it tells us to do, or present to us as options for us to do. You have the subconscious that is the background for all of our personalities, essentially. But the self mind
Mm-hmm.
is how I choose to show up. It's how I
Right.
intentionally make decisions. Because sometimes you have scenes that play out in your head, like you have, oh, look at this, there's a car crash, boom, but it didn't actually happen. You're just that's the conscious mind. It's always got to be going, and then you have the subconscious. So that self mind is there, kind of in the middle. And that all stemmed from the quote that says, and I forget who says it, but you are not your thoughts. So if we're not
Mm-hmm.
our thoughts, that means our thoughts must be something else. And so that's kind of where that concept for me kind of formed a little bit. But we have this conscious, the subconscious, and then there in the middle is us, is the self mind. What do you think about that?
I like that, and I really like the quote that, like, we're in our thoughts, because we have several thousand thoughts into our brain every day. Now, just because it enters our brain does not mean we have to entertain it. And this is why, like, some of those thoughts, no matter how positive we try to be or work to be, are going to be maybe negative
Mm-hmm.
thoughts. But what we can do is, by working with ourselves, is like, okay, let it go in and quickly let it go out, rather than sticking to that and focusing on that thought, focusing your energy onto that thought, or forcing your conscious mind onto that thought. So I think if we can understand that we're not our thoughts, it's much more liberating to say, okay, just because a thought operates on a negative or comes in at a negative frequency does not mean that we have to engage in that.
Yeah. And sometimes there's some wildly dark thoughts that kind of enter our mind, but we have to know, like you said, that those aren't us. Those are it's just the constant chatter that's there. It's like it's kind of like it's like the multiverse is living out in our head, and we're seeing kind of all these different kind of probable things that could happen and maybe did happen in some sort of version of us, but not this one, because we
Yeah.
chose to not live that out.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you were metaverse, and I'll even go back to you mentioned Carl Jung in the shadow. Carl Jung also said we have this collective unconscious where
Mhm.
we sort of get we share our ancestor thoughts, our thoughts of other people. And this is why sometimes you might have incidents of what we call synchronicity, where two people think of the same thing at the exact same moment.
Calculus was discovered that way. It was discovered on two different sides of the planet at near identical times to solve the same type
Yeah.
of equations.
Yes. And so again, sometimes it may not be our thoughts. It may be um, our ancestors' thoughts or somebody else's thoughts. So we are not our thoughts, and therefore we don't have, just because it enters our brain or our awareness does not mean we have to focus our energy on that.
So it's interesting you
So
talk about that because right now, in fact, I'm reading Carl Jung's Red Book, which is his kind of journey into his own subconscious that was kind of shielded away and not presented out for a long time. And it is it is wild to say the least. Yes. I don't know
uh,
if you're aware of that or not.
I haven't heard, read too much about. I mean, I've heard about the Red Book and the popularity of it, but I guarantee it is because he was a very complex, but he was also a genius, in
Yes.
my opinion, and on really with psychology. I kind of say more so than Freud, but that's a whole nother discussion. But I think that there's a lot to unpack there. And again, um, one thing that we started to see, at least in my circles with the NLP and hypnosis and psychology, is a concept known as generational trauma, which, we talk about trauma in our own lives, but a lot of times if we subscribe to this collective unconscious, we could also be inheriting and catching other people's trauma that really are not a part of us, but
Mm.
we're connected to it.
And it allows us, and that allows through the subconscious, we are affected by that, even though it didn't necessarily happen to us, but because it happened to someone in our past or the collective someone, then we are affected by that trauma. I have not thought about that. That's wild.
It really is. And that's why sometimes people, one thing I would often say, if you feel that you have bouts of sadness or bouts of worry or anxiety, and you may not even know the reason why.
Mm.
It's like, why do I feel so bad today? Or why do I feel so worried or fearful today when I have nothing to be fearful of? It might be you're absorbing somebody else's, thoughts and feelings. So that's why it's important not to, just when thoughts or feelings enter into your conscious awareness, you don't have to entertain them.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about NLP.
Hmm.
For anybody who doesn't know what NLP is, can you give me like a brief insight of what it is, and then how we can use that to improve across several different areas of our life?
Sure, NLP stands for neuro linguistic programming. So, and what that refers to is it's really a system that was designed um, to model excellence initially in the beginning. And it was usually mainly in the therapeutic sense, at least at first. Then it became more applied to like business and personal relationships. But with NLP, what we can do is use language to and use our nervous system, which was like our imagination and our focus and concentration to really make some lasting changes. That's where the programming comes in, rewiring itself, our brain, our thought processes. So I'll give you a really quick example. So for those that are listening, what I often say is imagine or picture that you're holding a suitcase. And in that suitcase, it's a very heavy suitcase, and that suitcase represents your worries and fears and insecurities and past. Um, so the one thing I might, again, with that suitcase is have someone imagine just putting that suitcase down or unpacking that suitcase and throwing the contents in the trash. And that's using your imagination, but it's also tying symbolism of, again, the contents of that suitcase are our worries, our fears, our anxieties, and our negative thoughts. So you're putting that in the trash area, and you're no longer holding on to that anymore. And sometimes, it's very powerful for imagination. And this is why the whole statement goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, because I can tell you something, but if I have you imagine it in a picturesque way, it's going to be much more powerful and impactful.
What's really interesting about that story that you just shared was, in fact, just yesterday, I was talking to a colleague of mine. He was saying that when he dies, he wants to be cremated, and he doesn't want his son to have to hold on to the urn with him in it. He wants to be dispersed somewhere. And what I shared with him was, well, that is wonderful on several different levels, because what that does is that means he can hold on to memories of you, and he's going to always have those memories. But
Mhm.
if he has the physicality of what was your body always with him, then he always has to feel as if you're always there. He has to hold on to that grief, all of those, sometimes that negativity, because that's your final form, sort of say.
Mhm.
So by bringing that him somewhere, his essence somewhere, and dispersing that does two things. One, it allows him to physically and metaphorically let go of that in a
Mhm.
freeing type of way, and in a sad but a joyful kind of way, because it's something that you wanted. So he can fulfill your final wishes. What I was telling my friend here, he can fulfill your final wishes by doing that. So that allows him to let go of the physicality of you and the final form of you, which sometimes is how, like, that can remind people of the end. And that's not what we want people to remember. We don't want people to remember the end. We want people to remember all the other parts. So by holding on to
Exactly.
that, it allows him, by dispersing that, allows him to let go of that. And again, in a free full, in sad but joyous kind of way, that is very similar to what you were just sharing, and it's very interesting to me, anyways, because I had just had that conversation just yesterday. So, hmm.
Yeah. No, and that's the key, is letting go. And um that's why, like, even going, like, with, having a physical body, having it buried in the cemetery. Every time we go to the cemetery, a lot, and I'll hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I feel so sad." I'm like, yeah, because it's reminding you
Hmm.
of the death. Um, so I kind of I like that principle, because, again, the memories are never going to leave, and they're going to always be a part of us. So we can treasure those memories.
Yeah. And then, if you so wished, if you wanted to go and visit, then you could go visit at that, probably a joyful kind of fun type of place, because nobody wants to be sprinkled, probably, at the bottom of a trash heap or whatever it is. You want to go to, like, the Golden Gate Bridge, and something like that. And then
Yeah.
it's an experience when you go and
Well,
remember that.
yeah, because usually what and again, with when people who choose to be, cremated and spread out, it's usually their favorite place.
Mm-hmm.
The
Hmm.
beach is very popular, or,
Yes.
again, the Golden Bridge, a park, or whatever it is that was really meaningful to that person. And then you can share that by going to that space and saying, "Okay, I'm connect with you energetically
Hmm.
while you're here, because this was your favorite place,
Right.
and we're gonna always remain connected here."
Yes.
Um, and the one thing, even with that, I mean, and the life of that person is over, but the relationship does never has to be
Hmm.
over.
Hmm.
Because really, the statement, death ends a life, not a relationship. So he could still have a relationship with his father by going to his father's favorite place and just,
Yes.
spending time in the moment. And that can help him stay connected with his father. And if he has kids of his own, he can bring them to the space and
Hmm.
tell them stories about their grandfather.
Yes.
And it's, oh,
So using that as kind of the idea of what a form of NLP is, where we allow ourselves to change our language that we're using to affect how we move forward from there. We take that heavy suitcase, we put it down, or we take that heavy suitcase, we open up, we look through some of those things. This is serving me, I want to keep this. This is not serving me, I want to get rid of this. And is that kind of the process that helps to enact that behavior change?
Sure. And then even with, your friend's son, another thing you could do is, whether it even be a physical or metaphorical thing, as he's dispersing the ashes, have him let a balloon go up in the air, in a
Mm,
sense like, I'm setting you free, a relationship, or even in his head, like metaphorically cutting like a cord or cutting a ribbon in a sense, because it's not tethering you to the physical, because no matter how much we handle a loss, we're going to be grieving. But I think a lot of people unintentionally make the grieving process worse by holding on.
mm. Yes. Well, and
And
unfortunately, the mindset that I have, the hard thing for me is when you go to a memorial service, it is almost designed to allow you to be the saddest that you possibly could be, which is interesting. Now as an adult going to these things, because they're playing the saddest music they possibly could find. It's just the saddest music, and you go there, you're already sad because you lost this person that you loved. You they're
then everybody's dressed in black, so
Yes.
that doesn't
Yes, it just is
really.
really, really tough. And so flipping the script, so to say, on that type of event, that type of monumental thing that happens to everybody in their life, really, I think can be impactful in the way that, like, using NLP can be impactful by looking at the things that they have in their life, choosing to see those things through a different light by changing the vocabulary that they use as they're thinking about those. And one thing that I've used in the past is people say that, okay, well, thoughts and feelings, those can't really change how I feel. And I say, okay, well, how about this? Have you or your spouse ever woken up and been mad at each other for something that the dream version of you did in their dream? Right? Yeah. How many
Yeah,
times does that happen? All the time. Now, hopefully they don't carry that, days and days, but it is sometimes difficult for them to consciously let go. Hey, that person in my dream was not this person. I understand that, but they have to come to that understanding on their own, or through some help. But they have to make it there in order for them to let go of whatever the sleep version, the dream version of you did in their dream. Otherwise, they're going to be mad at you at least for a day. And if that
yeah,
can happen, then I know my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, the words that I choose to use, the way that I verbalize things in my head, all has such an impact about how I show up through the day.
yeah. And even using dream work, I mean, now on a conscious intellectual knowledge, we know dreams are not real. But unless you're a lucid dreamer, which is only like less than 10%, most of the time, all the times when you're dreaming, no matter how absurd it is, it's real.
Hmm.
It's an actual real experience, and you have a real visceral reaction. So it's kind of, we can even use, that's why, like, very often you'll see hypnosis processes by putting people in a light trance, which is like a dreamlike state.
Hmm.
Because again, reality is subjective in a sense, and if we can change someone's reality in a sense, that's a major way and a step for better. So we can change someone's perception of something. That's a major win.
Well, and the really interesting thing about sleeping and awakefulness is there's a couple things. Number one, the window between awake and sleep is so vague. We can't, like, we know when we woke up, but we don't know when we fell asleep. That's really interesting. And the other thing is, you talked about lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is fascinating. I've tried to lucid dream a number of times. I haven't been able to make it there, which is a shame, but that's okay. The way that they do it from my understanding is there's a couple different tactics they do, but the foundation is they have to do consistent reality checks. They have to know when they're waking. So they try to put their finger through their palm, and if it goes through, oh, I must be dreaming. So then they can do whatever they do when they're in a lucid dream. But you have to do consistent reality checks because that window between awake and sleep is so vague. It's like you can't tell when it happens. And that's interesting. And then the other thing that tells me is, like you said, dreaming is just as real as a wakefulness because we don't know the difference. We don't know the difference between when we're awake and when we're dreaming, unless something wild happens. But even when something wild happens, we rationalize it in that sleep, in that dream, and we don't know the difference. I've heard people say that when we dream, it's almost like we're going to a different plane of existence, or we're living in a different dimension. Which is, I don't know that I necessarily believe that, but it is nonetheless interesting that awake to dream window is so vague that we don't know when we're awaking and when we're sleeping. That is really, really interesting.
And we don't know when we're sleeping, and that's the whole thing too until we wake up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why sometimes even when people, when they're working on the computer, they nod out, and all of a sudden, like it's 3 hours later.
Yes.
What happened? It was 3 hours, like a second ago. No, because you sleep.
You fell asleep, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So, but it is a very interesting process in a sense, and I think again, if dreaming can change our reality, we can do that in waking life too.
Yes, absolutely. Now, okay, Albert, you've coined the idea of scripts that hold us back. Can you give me some examples of what that is, and how can somebody begin to rewrite a positive script for themselves?
So scripts that hold us back is and that's as one thing that we're going to look to earlier is what happened to us between 1 and 7. So maybe your parents were critical of you, or and for the listener out here, your parents were critical. You're not going to be that smart. You're not going to, we're not that intelligent. We're not. Who do you think you are, in a sense? And what can then happen is we start to adapt like a prototype of who we are based on the information we heard. So a script could be, I'm always going to be average, never going to achieve greatness. And therefore, what winds up happening is you stay stuck in that perpetual state of being average. So I'm just going to, never going to produce anything. I'm never going to amount to much. Why am I even working hard? And if I'm just going to be average. And so the one thing that we have to really be mindful of the language that we use, even as adults, not only to other people when we communicate interpersonally, but also interpersonally as self-talk. Really, we have to be careful and mindful of that. So, because otherwise it becomes a script, and it becomes almost like the hamster and hamster wheel who's working very hard to pedal or run, but never moving anywhere.
Hmm.
And so that happens a lot, where we're working. You see people working so hard to change, and they're not making any changes because they're still stuck on that automatic, prototype, or the same language that keeps playing in their head, which is those scripts, those internal scripts of I'm not good enough, I always fail, I'm just average. And until we can rewrite that and say that's not true, or that was in the past, this is now.
And we have to realize that while we went through that like the version of us that was in the past is still us. However, we don't have to be that same person anymore. We can move and grow. Like I think of ancient times where they would wear the persona. Like the persona was the mask that they would wear when they went to do the play. But nowadays, that persona is who we are every day, all the time. We don't realize that we are wearing that mask, and people are like kind of throwing. I think about like people are throwing things on top of that, and it's changing our outward appearance. but also our inward appearance, because we have that persona. We're wearing that mask all the time. We have to learn to be able to take that mask off and just show up as
Yeah.
us, not as the persona, quote unquote, what that people want or what we think
Or,
people want.
or again, or even an illness or an addiction. A lot of
Mm,
people are like, well, I have this and that, or I'm a recovering addict. I'm like, no, you're a former addict. People
mm,
say I'm a recovering addict. What you're doing is you're still saying, I'm an addict. Hello. And that's one of the limitations that I feel are with traditional therapy and even 12-step groups. It's okay. Why can't you say, I used to be an addict, I'm no longer one anymore, rather than saying I'm an addict in recovery?
mm.
Wait a second, what? You know, so you're telling yourself you're an addict, or you know, um, or I'm a recovering cancer patient. No, you used to, you have it.
Mhm.
And what you could say is I'm a former. It's the same thing. You're just tweaking the language a bit. So this way you're not stuck in that, and that's why a lot of people. What's also really descriptive is your identity.
Mm. Now, okay, you wrote Rose above the script, or you rise above the script. Can you tell me a time when somebody truly rose above the script to have that amazing transformation in your life or in their life?
Well, I work a lot with actors, and that's like primarily what I wrote the book for, performing artists. It's when they start taking action and living in a state of successful, creation. So they no longer have to be the struggling artist anymore. They no longer have to be the starving artist anymore, or the tortured artist. They can now be a thriving artist. There's someone who I used to work with, um, who I met about 11 years ago. When I met her 11 years ago, she was very shy, timid. I'm going to try this acting thing out. Now, 11 years later, she's now been on several TV shows. She's a regular on a Showtime series because she changed simple tweaks in her mindset, about coming from a place of I'm enough. I'm rewriting that narrative of that struggling, starving artist into a thriving, working artist.
Okay, all right. So thinking of scripts, thinking about rewriting these things, is there a exercise that you go through or you go through with your clients where they write down kind of the dream life for them? They write down what their vision for themselves would be. And if so, are there any constraints or anything that you give them to help that to be the best for them?
Well, I then kind of come up with the idea of SMART goals, which is specific, measurable, actionable. So, okay, first thing, let's write out your dream. Now, what are the steps that you need to get to that point from the beginning to the end? And there's a lot of times it's multi steps. Okay, well, let's start with step one, and then what are some goals that we come up with to reach step one? And rather than just being conceptual things, putting into action. Okay, maybe you need to reach out to these people, network with these types of people, send out these bunch of emails, make these presentations on this topic. The next step, once you list that the first step and what you need to do to map that out, put it in your calendar. Okay, so when are you going to do this by? When? Because a lot of people are also stuck into when they're trying to achieve their goals and the script of someday. Someday I'm going to write that book. Someday I'm going to start this program. The problem is someday doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as a someday.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So,
Um,
mhm.
all right. I want to share this with you because I think this is you're like right there. I Goal setting is big for me. I have many goals, but I was thinking about goal setting all wrong. all backwards, because I was using that smart-based system, and it has some holes in there. You are filling many of those holes, but oftentimes that doesn't happen. And so what I came up with was a new goal setting acronym similar to SMART goal setting. But what it does is it fills the holes in my own interpretation of what SMART goals were missing. And I call it the visionary goal setting system. So with visionary, you have visualized success. So what does success look like for you? You integrate your values. So you have values, and values, when I say values, is not honesty, integrity, but actual things that you value spending time doing. So you have visualize success, integrate your values, set your why. Why do I want to achieve whatever this goal is? Next is instill affirmations, because that's our positive self-talk. That's that NLP kind of measure built into it. And then you have O, which is organized daily practices, because I want this thing, I visualize it, but unless I put things in every day, it's not going to happen. So that's where you talk about putting the things on your calendar. Do something about it. Next one is navigate weekly check-ins, right? Because you need to be checking in on your goals, see where your progress at, see where you are succeeding, see where you're falling short at, and having that on the calendar, a weekly check-in is so
Yes.
helpful. And then you want to anticipate obstacles, right? Because what happens is when we anticipate obstacles, we think, okay, this isn't always just going to be easy. The goal isn't from, a linear line. There's going to be ups and downs. And if I can think through some potential obstacles along the way, that allows me to be in it. That allows me to be ready to accept those challenges if and when they come. And if I have a plan of action for those things, then maybe that exact obstacle doesn't come. That's okay. I have a plan of action that might work for that, or I morph together 2 or 3 of them. Pow, there's my way to anticipate that obstacle and move on from there. And next is you want to reveal comfort zone stretching, right? You want to move outside of your comfort zone, because if your goal is to make $50,000 this year, and your contract at your work says you're going to make $50,000 this year, that's not a goal. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. If you want to make more than that, then you have to be able to step outside your comfort zone and do something different. And then the last one, why, is yield to adaptability. You have to be adaptable in your approach. Like it's not, things aren't always going to go your way, and that's okay. But you have to be able to adapt to whatever does happen on the fly, if and when it does happen. So that was my way of using that SMART goal system kind of as a framework, and then redesigning it to fill the holes that I found it does. And like I said, you are having your clients go through lots of those things, same things that I have. That's just verbalized a little bit differently.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
All right. So Albert, I want to switch to AI. AI is like the hot thing right now.
Mhm.
How are you using ChatGPT and Claude, or maybe some other tools, to enhance creativity, productivity for creators?
I use it as a brainstorming tool or even help with some of the automated stuff. Um, I still think it's important to add or give it a lot of context. So um, I don't necessarily believe that AI is going to be the answer to everything, but it definitely is a great tool. So like even when you're coming up with your goals, you can have a dialogue with ChatGPT and saying, "These are my goals." You know, using a framework. How can I achieve these goals? And it'll give you some ideas. Now, again, it may not that idea may not always work for you because it's just a chatbot. It doesn't know your life. So, but it'll give you some ideas. So I look at it as an idea generator in a sense, like, oh, this is a great starting point. I never thought of it that way, or I never thought of this way. So what I have to say is give it as much context as possible if you want to use a tool. What we call prompting is giving instructions, but give it detailed instructions. Like say, I wouldn't say, okay, help me be productive today. Well, I'm going to get a very generic vanilla response. But if I turn around and give it context, like this is what I need to do today, this is what I've already done, and I'm adding my own customized flavor to it. This is what I'm thinking of doing. Can you come up with any other suggestions? Now I'm giving the context to the robot, which what really is more context and more, so it's able to kind of dig deeper and think with me. So I have to say it's a partner, not as a
Mm.
substitute for anything. Um, that I come from the knowledge, and I know some people may not agree with this, but I know one of the biggest fears I hear a lot of people say, "Well, AI is going to take our job." I don't think so. I don't, at least not in the near future. I mean, AI is developing at a really fast rate.
Mm.
I mean, almost if you think about it, every week there's new developments,
Yes.
and so who knows what 2 or 3 years down the line what AI is going to look like from now. But I know right now I wouldn't be anybody who's listening would be concerned at all about taking jobs away. Now it can make the automation easier.
Sure.
Uh, it can automate a lot of tedious work.
Mm. Or I know some
You know,
people have thought about using it like an undergrad student. Like you use it to go do this kind of menial type of research or whatever, come back, and then you have to kind of shift through the stuff because maybe it's not a very good research
right?
system, but it's there, and okay, that's some information.
Yeah. I'm a little skeptical of that.
Mm.
Right away when so I can use this to write my paper. No, careful because it it can hallucinate.
Mm.
It can make up facts. It can make up, if you say like, give me some sources, it can totally make up a source that
And
doesn't
website.
exist.
Yes.
And and that's how people got into trouble with it,
Uh-huh.
because it found out. But it can certainly use as a proofreader, an editor.
Hmm.
When you already have something written, or even as an outliner, say, hey, I'm writing a paper on this. I need an outline.
Hmm.
What keep me focused on this, and this. And then you can even ask the question like, well, is there anything else I should cover?
Yeah. Yeah. So
But
like not using AI to do the thinking for you, but
no,
using
it never do that.
using AI to help you think through some things or to give you
Yeah,
feedback on things that you have thought about.
yeah, because AI can only go based on what it was trained.
Hmm.
It cannot think
Yes.
really for you. It can just go by what was other people's methods or tried and true. So, what I would definitely say is always proofread and always modify. Don't just sit there and think like, okay, I'm going to cut. Oh, here we go. I'm turning in the paper.
Sure.
Because believe it or not, your professors will know.
Yes, they will. Yes, especially if you don't read it and it says, as an AI model, I don't know that.
I had so many teachers tell me this story that they would get papers that would say that in the
Hmm.
middle of it,
It's,
and
it's, yes.
it's
Well,
like, okay, I'm going to give this F, but I'll give the AI model an A. At that
yeah,
point.
there you go. Okay. With prompting, you talked about sort of like the result that you get is only going to be as good as the prompt that you give it. Is there a point where where you can give it too much information? So here, let me back this up a little bit. I have used the kind of mentality of if I put in good information, if I put the prompt is good, full, informative, then the output's going to be good, which is more often than not served me pretty well. But what that means is sometimes my prompts are several thousand words, or I prompt it in such a way it doesn't quite do what I want it to do, so I modify it on the fly, or in fact, sometimes I just ask it, hey, that didn't quite do what I wanted to do. How can I revise or modify the prompt in order to do this better next time? So
Mhm.
is there a line that is like, okay, that's too much? Like, okay, obviously if it's not relevant, okay, I get that, but is 5,000
I
words too much for a prompt?
It could be. It could overwhelm the system a bit sometimes, depending on the. Also, what we have to keep in mind is what is the energy usage on it at the moment? Because if you're on a
Mm.
peak time where there's so many other users doing that, it is going to affect the outcome. And I've heard this
Ah,
too from other experts and programmers in the field that if it's like a really peak time where there's hundreds of thousands of other users working on the model at the same time, it may change the results. Because I've even had it too, where certain times of the day I would get some outputs that were like really didn't make any sense,
mm,
where others were like very spot on. And also keep in mind that with prompting, it's not just I'm going to type a prompt and then get the output and I'm done.
Yes.
It may take a while of going back and forth, massaging
Hmm.
and tweaking things out, adding stuff that you'll get the right response that you need.
Hmm. I know one thing that I've done in the past is I'll create the prompt, but I'll create it in such a way that I'll have it do. Let's see. I'll coach it to do a certain task, and then I'll say, if you understand this, uh, greet me by introducing yourself, and then asking me to share a little bit about myself. So we have a little bit of a dialogue there. And then the next thing that I kind of like to do is I will set up systems within that specific chat, where if I say X, it always does Y. And
Right.
sometimes it doesn't do that 100% just because it's AI and it hallucinates, I think is what happens there. But more often than not, then I can come back to that, feed it the same sort of prompt, despite all of the extra stuff that's there. I can feed the same kind of starting thing, and it's going to give me the output that I want based on what I want at that time, not necessarily overlaid with everything else that came before it.
Right. And that's key there too, is you're coming back and forth saying, like, can you think of it this way or do it again? So you're kind of going back and forth with it. You're not just
Mm-hmm.
accepting the first outcome.
Yes. Yes. Well, Albert, hey, I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of this
Thank
information.
you.
This was right up my alley. This is such a good episode. Hey, before we wrap up, do you have any key thoughts or final takeaways you would like to share with the audience? And if they wanted to get in contact with you or learn more about you, what would be the
Yeah.
best way for them to do that?
Well, I would say go to my website, albertbramante.com. I'd also encourage you to check out my book, Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt, Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists. It's on Amazon and audiobook and Kindle. So I would check that out. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. So I'd love to connect with you. And the final words I would say is take action. Don't put it on your calendar. Someday doesn't exist. Take action today. You don't have to wait for next Monday or next year. Start today.
Very good. And listeners, until next time, keep rewriting your script and achieving your highest potential.